Good morning and welcome to another day of Bible study. We are now in day 5 of the Whole50 Bible study, and so grateful that you are alongside us for this journey. Today, 1 Samuel chapter 17, and the name of the study is The Giants in Our Way, and I am particularly excited about this one. If you would like to get a copy of this Bible study, you can go to christtable.today and pick up your copy of the Bible study there. Of course, you don't necessarily need it in order to join us. You can just watch us right here on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitch, every day over 50 days as we walk through some of the most spiritually helpful passages in Scripture. And so each of these passages are ones that to me have been some of the most spiritually transformational in my life, where I've seen them be spiritually transformational in other people's lives, and so have kind of pulled all of these things together, and I'm looking forward to doing them. And we're not going to be, like I said in the past, we're not going to be in some of the normal places in Scripture. We're not going to be in the Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. We're not going to be in the Beatitudes, and these are all great passages. But sometimes whenever we come to these passages of Scripture that we hear all of the time or that we're familiar with, it's super hard for us to really hear them again. So what I thought we'd do with this Whole50 Bible study as we walk through 50 spiritually transformational passages is that we go to places in Scripture that oftentimes you don't think is being catalytic to their spiritual faith. And so these first 4 days have been absolutely incredible, honestly. And I'm really excited about this one. I'm probably going to say that each and every day, that I'm super excited about the study that's in front of us. And so I'm glad that you're here. You can be a part of it. If you want to book christtable.today, or if you just want to find out more about what God is doing in the ministry that is launching and providing all of these materials and resources for you, then go ahead and feel free and head there. Well, today we are in the classic story, which I think probably almost everyone has heard of. If not, it's okay. But I know that even people who didn't grow up going to Sunday school understand the story a little bit on some level of David and Goliath. It's kind of one of those things that has embedded itself in culture, this idea of the little guy, David, and Goliath, the giant. Now, while I believe that this story is true, is literal, actually happened, today what we're going to do is we're going to look at it from a little bit more of a metaphorical sense, in that a lot of times we, just like David, face giants in our own lives, issues that seem insurmountable, people that are gigantic. The history books tell us that Goliath was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 feet tall. And so sometimes the issues or the problems or the people that we face become a giant such as Goliath in our own lives. How do you handle those? It can be difficult. The giants in your life can be scary. In fact, many times the giants in your life can prevent you from continuing down the path that God has you on. This is precisely what happens in this story. Whenever Goliath and the Philistines stand in the way of Israel, they have essentially stalled out Israel's progress, and they weren't doing anything about it. Essentially, King Saul and the rest of the Israelites had said, this Goliath is too great. He's too big. We can't defeat him, can't get past him, can't go around him. So they just stop. The Goliaths in your life can have that effect on you too. I don't know that that's necessarily always the best option, even though it may seem as though that's the case. Sometimes the Goliaths in our life need to fall. So 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 32. Don't worry about this Philistine, David told Saul. I'll go fight him. This is David, a young boy, shepherd boy, speaking to the king. Don't worry about this giant. What are you worried about? What are you scared of? How often in my life have my kids done that to me, where I am fretting over something, terrified about something, completely and utterly stopped in my tracks and stalled, and it takes a child or somebody with a simple outlook to simply look and say, why are you worrying about this so much? Sometimes the Goliaths, the giants in our life, aren't as big as we've made them out to be. We've made them 9 foot tall. We've made them grand problems in our life, hurdles that we're unable to get over. But the truth of the matter is that there's more tale than truth in that. David looks at Goliath, looks at this giant, and says, nothing to worry about. Don't know what your issue is. I'll go take care of him for you. Saul replied, don't be ridiculous. Sometimes the giants in our life, we can't see that our fear of them is ridiculous. And whenever somebody else does, we can't see the truth in it. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win, Saul says. You're a boy. He's been a man of war since his youth. He's been training to kill people since he was your age. Now look how big he is. Look how old he is. You don't stand a chance. But David persists. To me, this reminds me that there are always going to be reasons why your battle is too hard to win. Why the giant that you're facing cannot be defeated. There are always going to be those Sauls who are standing there saying, don't even try. It is a lost cause to defeat this giant that you're facing before you even begin. But God. There are always going to be reasons why the battle is too hard to win. The giant probably is bigger than you. The giant probably is more complex than you can handle on your own. The giant that you're facing probably isn't going to be waylaid by any weapons or anything that you have within your control. But God. There is that unquantifiable thing, God, that makes up the difference between what you have and what you are and what you need in order to defeat the giant. You probably don't have what it takes. But God. You probably don't have the weapons or the resources in order to defeat this thing, this lawsuit, this financial problem, this relationship issue, this person who's telling lies about you. But God. So David persists and says, I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I'll go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. And I can hear David in his youth just being, I take care of sheep and I take care of goats. And whenever there's a lion or a bear around to come and steal that lamb, I chase it. Sometimes I have a club and I'll rescue that lamb right from its very mouth. Now, I don't want to downplay any of this, but I want you to hear Saul hearing this. You know, Goliath's a giant, a man of war who's been trained as a killing machine since his youth, apparently. Now, David's here saying, I sit out in fields. I tend sheep. Sometimes I see a bear or a lion, and I'll chase it. And if the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw, and I beat the heck out of it. I club it to death. I've done this to lions and bears, and I don't want to downplay this. You're not going to catch me out there doing these things. But a human, a giant, is a whole other issue than a lion or a bear. Saul perhaps had done these things with lions and bears in his training. David says, and I'll do this to the pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of God. He stood up to the wrong person. He has defied God. And the Lord, who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. You ever read the resume that seems a little too good to be true? You read it and you're like, yeah, you've used a thesaurus on this resume. It's a little too good to be true. Then you start reading between the lines, you see, yeah, okay, so this job didn't go quite as well. You said you did all of these things, but you were also only there for 2 months. In fact, you've had a string of those things. Maybe you're trying to sell me a bill of goods here. The first half of David's resume has him destroying wild animals like bears and lions and tigers. Oh my. And then right here we see the Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. So apparently it didn't go quite so well in that job with the lion. Apparently it didn't go quite so well at that job with the bear. If you had to be rescued from it by God, not saying there wasn't a lot of courage and risk and bravery involved there, David. Not saying that sometimes you try to tackle a big giant like a lion or bear and you got to get some outside resources for help, but at first you said that you took care of him on your own, and now you're kind of saying that God had to rescue you from it. Perhaps he did. Forgive me, though, for thinking that he may not do the same thing with the Philistine. But Saul probably figures, what does he have to lose? Let's throw this kid out there. See what happens. What I love about this, though, is that you may think that your resume is preparing you for one battle, but it's actually preparing you for another. You see, David's resume was warding off lions and tigers and bears from sheep. Maybe he's going to be a zookeeper. Maybe he's going to be a lion tamer, the center of a 3-ring circus. Perhaps he's going to be the next Steve Irwin, or maybe he's going to be the greatest shepherd of all time. That would be what his resume would say he should be doing, right? But God has been giving him those experiences, not so he can do those things, but so that whenever the giant arrives, and this won't be the first or the last giant that David faces, he's going to have the courage with God to take care of it. God has given you a lot of experiences. And other people are going to look at your resume and say, yeah, those haven't prepared you for this. But God. Saul looked at David's resume and said, yeah, this isn't the resume of a warrior who should be fighting Goliath, but I relent. Whatever. Go ahead. You may believe that all of the experiences that you've had up until this moment are leading you towards one thing. And God says, that's not the plan. I have something so much better for you. When I show it to you, though, it's going to blow your mind because it's going to be so far out of left field, you're not going to see it. But you're going to have needed all of those things on your resume in order to be ready for this thing that I now need you to do. All right, go ahead, Saul says. God be with you, because you aren't coming back. So, in order for people to not blame Saul for sending a little boy out to Goliath, Saul makes this grand gesture of giving him his own armor, a bronze helmet, a coat of mail. Maybe Saul was thinking that if they killed this kid in Saul's armor, then they would think they'd killed the king, and they would leave and they could take him by surprise. Who knows? David puts it on, straps the sword over it, took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. I can't go in these, he protested to Saul. I'm not used to them. So David takes off all of this expensive armor that is a protection against Saul. He can't go out there without any protection. So Saul has given him some. He can't go out there without any protection against the giant. And many well-meaning people or not so well-meaning people are going to try to burden you with their own weaponry. Yeah, I faced a giant once, and this is what I did. Yeah, I had that issue once, and this is how I handled it. You need to do this. Yeah, I had this problem once, and this is what I took to handle it. This is who I talked to. Go talk to them. And I don't want to say that giving advice is wrong or imply that receiving advice from other people who have walked similar paths isn't a good idea. But at the end of the day, everyone's going to try to burden you with their own story. And usually it's not going to be helpful, because they're going to try to dissuade you from God's path. No, you don't need to do that. You need to do this. No, don't handle it that way. You need to handle it this way. No, 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 no. No, you're not thinking right here. Everyone wants to live their life vicariously through you. But you must wage your own war against the giants. Accept help, accept advice, but at the end of the day, understand that other people's burdens are not your burden. So instead, David picks up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them into his shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with his shepherd's staff and a sling, he starts across the valley to fight the Philistine. Goliath walks out towards David with his shield bare ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. Am I a dog? Goliath roars at David, that you would come at me with a stick, which is what a slingshot was, essentially a stick with a pouch at the end. And he cursed David by the names of his gods. Come over here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and wild animals, Goliath yelled, and many of you have been taunted by the giants in your life like this for years. And you understand how it feels, how David must have felt. You understand what it was like to be worn down, to be called things, to be named things that are untrue. You may know what it means to have lost your courage and your bravery. And it may be time to find it again against the giants in your life. Because David replies to the Philistine, you come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you. And he doesn't name a slingshot here. He says, I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies and the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. You see, David recognizes that his strength isn't in his slingshot or his weaponry or his armor. He has none of those things. David realizes that he's standing on principle, and his strength is not in any of that weaponry or armor, but his strength is in God. And the outcome of this giant confrontation in his life is going to be determined essentially by God and David's faith. He doesn't know how this is going to end, but he knows that God can be trusted. And he knows that he would much rather be facing the giants down and die so doing, rather than allow the giant to defeat him without a fight. And Goliath had defeated the rest of Israel without a fight. And David says, you've defied God. And whatever happens from here forward is God's, but I'm going to name the problem. Sometimes your greatest responsibility when you encounter giants, especially spiritual giants, is to name the problem. The problem here that's being named isn't that Goliath is too big, isn't that there is a difference of opinion on who should own the land. The biggest problem here is that Goliath has defied God, that Philistines have defied God. And David seems to be the only person who is saying this isn't a physical battle. This is a spiritual battle, a spiritual issue. You have defied God. The outcome of this physical battle will be determined perhaps by strength, perhaps by weaponry, perhaps by luck, perhaps by God. But whatever the outcome is for me, I'm going to name the problem, speak truth, and let the chips fall where they may. You see, this is really where David honestly defeats the giant. It's right here. It's when he stands up to the giant and says, "But God." But God. The rest of it doesn't matter. I think the giant fell right here. At least in David's heart. At least in the hearts of those Israelites. The giant fell here. He continued to live and breathe for a little while longer. But he was already dead in all of the ways that really matter. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. And then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. It's hard to know. It's hard to know whether or not David is just being brave or whether or not David knew these things. I think this is one of those choose your own adventure moments. Did David know that verse 46 was going to be the outcome of the day? Was he that confident? Or is David simply bluffing? I don't know. The giant has already fallen in David's, excuse me, wow. The giant has already fallen in David's mind and in David's heart, and now I think in the rest of the armies of Israel. And all the rest of it is just sideshow. And David says that everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people. And here it is. The Lord rescues his people, but not with sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us. So David seems to understand it's not going to be the sword and the spear that win this battle. It's going to be something else. When it's God's battle that you're fighting, there is no need for any weaponry in your arsenal. I don't know that David really needed 5 stones and a slingshot to defeat Goliath. I don't know that he needed a slingshot at all. Whenever it's God's battle that you're fighting, and it's his side that you're standing on, it really doesn't matter what you have at hand. It's God who's fighting, not you. So Goliath moves closer to attack. David quickly runs out to meet him. Reaching into his shepherd's bag, he takes out a stone. He hurled it with a sling and hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in. Goliath stumbled and fell face down to the ground, so David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. And that's the end of Goliath. I want to close with this. For the whole time together, we've been looking through the lens of other giants in our lives that are standing in the way of God's path for us. But I think it's a good practice for us to take a moment and say, are we the giant? Are we Goliath? Are we standing in the way of God? God's people, or God's plan. I don't think we're always David. I think there are moments in our journey where we're Goliath. And I don't think anyone is ever always Goliath. And there are moments in their journey, maybe many, where they're David instead. But sometimes we are the giant. Sometimes we're the Goliath that's standing in the way of what God is doing or standing in the way of God's person. Self-reflection is helpful here, but also hearing from critical voices around us whom are tuned into God can be sometimes helpful as well. Not the people who are going to tell us what we want to hear, but the people who are going to often tell us things we don't want to hear are going to be best able to tell us, where are we right now? How are we right now? If you're a giant, the moral of the story is be afraid. Be very afraid. Well, it's been good to be with you today. Looking forward to being back with you tomorrow for day 6 of the Whole50 Bible study. Thanks for being here. It's been quite a ride. Looking forward to the next day. Until tomorrow, though, happy reading.